Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello, and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. It's been a little while since the last episode. I've been pretty busy over the last month. But we're finally back to it, ready to get back into Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. So, of course, this is part 3 of our Dead Men Tell No Tales watch-along. So if you haven't listened to the first 2 episodes, then you should go and do that, so at least you're caught up with where we are in the movie. Or you can start right here if you like the second half of the movie better than the first half, which, to each their own. But anyway, we're going to get right back into where we left off last time. Now, if you remember last episode, we ended right after Henry and Carina were taken aboard the Dying Gull with Jack and the rest of the crew, and the Dying Gull successfully floats in the water, so they can finally set off and try to find the Trident of Poseidon. So after that scene, we go right over to the Queen Anne's Revenge. Of course, we saw the Queen Anne's Revenge for the first time since On Stranger Tides last episode, so I kind of talked about how it's changed over the, since Barbossa became its captain, and how Barbossa's pretty much almost the most powerful pirate in the ocean at this point in time. So the Queen Anne's Revenge is sailing toward the Silent Mary in the distance. And Murtaugh yells out, "Ship dead ahead!" And Murtaugh's looking through his spyglass, and he butts Mulroy on the arm, and Mulroy goes over to Barbossa. And he's like, "We would never question your reason as a captain, but is there a reason?" But then Murtaugh butts in. He's like, "But is there a reason that you've chosen to sail in this unreasonable direction?" And Barbossa stands up out of his chair and he says, "Tell the men to prepare to be boarded, to stand their ground and show no fear." And then we get a great sweeping look at the Silent Mary and its whole ghost crew. And Lieutenant Lazaro, who is currently on the helm, he calls over Captain Salazar, and he's like, "Capitan, a ship sails toward us." And Salazar takes the helm, and the Silent Mary begins to do its ship eating pose. So the whole front of the ship, the bow of the ship, lifts up out of the water, and the hull opens up like a rib cage, kind of like how we saw last episode when it devoured one of Barbossa's ships. So Barbossa's standing right at the bow on the Queen Anne's Revenge, and he yells out, "Captain Salazar, I hear you be looking for Jack Sparrow." And this instantly catches Salazar's attention. But we get this really great shot of the Silent Mary, just hovering over the bow of the Queen Anne's Revenge. And then some of the Silent Mary's crew, they jump down onto the Queen Anne's Revenge, including Lieutenant Lazaro and, of course, Captain Salazar. There's this really great scene of one of Barbossa's men. He tries to shoot one of Salazar's crew, but the bullet that... He shoots his pistol, but the bullet goes right through the guy and kills one of the crewmates behind him. But Lieutenant Lazaro, he yells out, "Hold point and await orders." There's also a little moment between Murtaugh and Mulroy and this one ghost pirate. So one of the cool things about the Salazar's ghost crew is that they don't all look the same, which is nice. And, we'll come to find out why they all look so differently. It's because they were affected in different ways by the explosion. Spoiler alert, when the Silent Mary blows up in the past. But I love how this guy he's holding a knife, holding a sword up to Mulroy's throat, and all you can see is just his 2 arms. There's nothing else there. And I love how Murtaugh, he kind of he waves his hand through where the guy should be, and he just kind of he pulls his sword closer to Mulroy's throat. But I think that's one of the cool things I like about Salazar's crew is that they don't all look the same, and some of them, their bottom half is missing. Some of them, there's nothing but hands. I think the uniqueness of how they can look is kind of cool, and I like that about them. But then, of course, we have a great shot of Barbossa, and Salazar drops down right behind him, and he walks over to Barbossa. And we can kind of see, before Barbossa turns around to face Salazar, you can almost see some fear in Barbossa's face, which is honestly kind of interesting because, Barbossa is probably the toughest pirate we've ever encountered in this franchise. Like, he's not fazed by anything. Barbossa, he doesn't care. Like, so seeing him kind of scared to face Salazar here, it's really interesting. I mean, I think it kind of humanizes Barbossa a little bit more, like, because, he's just, at this point, he's just an ordinary guy. He's not cursed anymore. He's not unkillable. He's just an ordinary guy, and he fears for his life, his treasure, his ships, his fleet. So at this point, he's got a lot to lose, and I think he knows that, and I think it's cool to see Barbossa actually scared for once. But Barbossa finally turns around to face Captain Salazar. And I gotta say, to kind of ties in with the Ghost crew and how they look, but the digital effects in this movie for the Ghost crew, they look incredible. Like, I think they did a fantastic job just making them look, they just look so cool. But Barbossa, he begins and he says, "My name is Captain Barbossa. I stand before you with cordial intent." And Salazar starts laughing and he's like, "Cordial intent." He's like, "Do you hear that? This pirate wishes to be cordial. So let me show you what my cordiality is, hombre. Every time I tap my sword, one of your men will die. So I suggest that you speak quickly." And he taps his sword on the deck, and one of his crew stabs and kills one of Barbossa's men. And Salazar says, "Might want to go a bit faster, Capitan." And then he taps his sword 2 times, and 2 more of Barbossa's men die. And then Salazar turns back around, and he's like, "Where's Jack Sparrow?" And Barbossa says, "Jack be sailing for the Trident." And Salazar's like, No, the sea belongs to the dead." And Barbossa's like, "The Trident controls the sea." And Salazar gets angry at this. He's like, No! There is no treasure. There is no treasure that can save him. He will die, as will you. And he pulls up his sword and points it at Barbossa's heart. And Barbossa pleads here. He's like, "I be the only one that can lead you to him." And Barbossa says, "I declare you shall have Jack's life by sunrise on the morrow, or you can take me own then. Do we have an accord?" And Salazar, he walks closer to Barbossa and he says, "Take me to him, and you will live to tell the tale." And Barbossa says, "You have my word. I thank ye on behalf of me crew." And Salazar just laughs, and he taps his sword a bunch of times on the deck, and a bunch of Barbossa's men just start dying, and Salazar just says, "Well, you can take what's left of them." And I think that this is a great scene. And then he says, "The living come aboard." And that's the end of this scene. But I think it's a great scene to show how menacing and powerful Salazar is. Because as we'll come to find out, Salazar was the scourge of piracy years ago. And even though he's dead and cursed, he's still a force to be reckoned with. And I don't know, I think I like that about him. He's a very menacing guy. Like, is he on the level of, like, Davy Jones? Definitely not. But, like, he's a menacing guy who, at this point, he just wants to break the curse on him. He doesn't want to be cursed anymore. But, of course, he doesn't like pirates, so he doesn't care if he kills pirates. He wants to kill pirates. And since he's dealing with, Barbossa, who is a pirate, he could care less if Barbossa or his crew die. So, like, I think it's a really cool thing. I think he's a cool villain. We go back over to the Dying Gull in the next scene, and we have this great shot of Henry and Carina, of course, are tied to the mast. And then if we look in the background, we see Jack Gibbs, Marty Scrum, Pike Bollard, like all the guys. They're back there just looking at the diary, and they're like trying to figure out what it is, and like I think it's a great shot. And Henry, he tries to look over at Carina. He's like, Carina, we haven't got much time. The dead are sailing straight for us. And Carina's like, is that so? And Henry's like, yes, I've spoken to them. And Carina's like, you've spoken to them. Have you spoken to krakens and mermaids as well? And Henry's like, krakens don't speak. Everyone knows that. And Carina's like, of course. He's like, I never should have saved you. And Henry's like, last night there was a blood moon, just as you described. Tell me what it revealed. And Carina's like, and why should I trust you? And Henry's like, you trusted me to hold your port, remember? And Carina's like, that was my stern. Clearly you need to spend more time at sea. Which I think is a funny jab at Henry, especially because Henry has been studying the sea and like all this stuff for his whole life. So the fact that he doesn't know his port from his stern, I think is kind of funny. But Henry is like, tell me what you found and I promise to help you. And Carina's like, I don't need any help. And Henry's like, then why did you come to me, Carina? Why are we tied together in the middle of the sea chasing the same treasure? And Carina finally relents, and she's like, the moon revealed a clue. To release the power of the sea, all must divide. And Henry's like, divide? What does that mean? And Carina's like, I'm not sure yet. And Henry's like, then we'll find out. And then they get interrupted by Jack, who runs over to Carina, and he holds out the diary, and he opens it up, and he's like, there is no map in this map. And Carina's like, give me my diary. And then I'll have Jack, he like pulls it away from her. He's like, give me the map no man can read. And Carina's like, if you could read it, then it wouldn't be called the map no man can read. And Henry's like, I beg you, please don't argue with her. And then Jack's like, most of the men on this ship can't read, which makes all maps the map no man can read. And Carina's like, well, if you can't read it, then you have no use for it or me. And Jack's like, let me start again. Show me the map. And Carina's like, I can't. It doesn't yet exist. And then Marty like gets all scared. He's like, she's a witch. And Carina's like, I'm an astronomer. And Scrum's like, she breeds donkeys. And Carina's like, what? No, an astronomer contemplates the sky. And Scrum's like, yeah, on a donkey. And Carina's like, no, there's no donkey. And then Crumble just butts in. He's like, well, then how do you breed them? It's so fantastically funny scene. It's so good. And then Jack, he interrupts again. He's like, allow me to simplify this equation. Give me the map, or I will kill him. And he finally points to Henry. He's like, I'll kill him. And then Henry gets visibly scared, and Carina just holds her ground, and she's like, go on then, you're bluffing. And then Jack just says, and you're blushing. And he smiles, and he says, throw him over. And then the crew, they grab Henry off the mast, and they bring him over to the stern of the ship, and Jack's like, we call this keel hauling. Young Henry will be tossed over and dragged under the ship. And Carina's like, all right, what are you waiting for? And then I love how Henry's like, he doesn't appear to be bluffing. And then Ballard puts a handkerchief in his mouth so he can't talk. And then Jack's like, nope, not bluffing, me. He's like, he's trying to say something. And like Henry's trying to talk, and Jack's like, no, we don't have any food aboard, sorry. And then Ballard throws him off the side of the ship, and Gibbs says if he's lucky, he'll drown before the barnacles shred him to ribbons. And then Carina's like, barnacles? And Jack's like 1,000 knives across your back. Of course, the blood attracts sharks. And Carina's like, sharks? And then I love how Gibbs just yells, shark off the bow! And then Scrum and Marty go and look over the side of the ship. And Jack's like, I would say that swimming is no longer his primary concern. And then finally, Carina relents again. She's like, the map is there, and she points her finger up into the sky. And I love how everyone looks up, and they're like, what is she pointing at? And then I love how Marty's like, on the tip of your finger. And she's like, no, in the heavens. That diary will lead me to a map hidden in the stars. Let him up, I'll find it tonight. And then Jack's like, nope, sorry, can't bring him up. Look for yourself. Then Carina runs over to where they threw Henry off, and she looks over, and Jack says, as I said, blushing. And then we get the reveal that Henry was just thrown into the longboat on the side of the Dying Gull. So they tricked Carina, of course, but I think it's a great moment, and I love this scene. But Carina just ends with filthy pirate. Then we go back over to St. Martin, or I guess we're on St. Martin. But we have some Royal Navy officers they have taken Shanza from her cell/lair, and they're bringing her down to the cell that Carina was in before she escaped. And of course we see that John Scarfield is waiting here for her. And he says, the sea has turned to blood. A sailor washed ashore talking about the trident. He was looking for Jack Sparrow, the same pirate who saved a witch from the gallows. And I love how Shanza is like, she's no witch. And Scarfield just says, but you are. And you're going to help us. And Shanza says, you're afraid, Lieutenant. As ships burn in the night, you want to know if you can save your own. Or if the trident is real. And Scarfield, he says, you're going to read that wall for me, or you will die. The British Empire will have the trident and rule the sea. I want to know where that pirate is going with that witch. And then, of course, we see all this stuff that Carina has scribbled onto the prison wall, all these calculations, different equations. Then, of course, we see in the middle, we see the titular Carina constellation. And Shanza says, your destiny is in these stars. I will set your course. Then we get this nice transition from the constellation on the wall to the actual constellation in the sky. And then we go back down to the Dying Gull at night. So we see Carina, she's doodling in the diary, I guess, waiting to see what the constellation will reveal. She looks over at Henry, who's on the stern of the ship, and we can see in the background, we see lightning flashing, so we can obviously tell the Silent Mary is encroaching on the Dying Gull. But, of course, Jack is asleep, and as soon as Henry, he slaps his spyglass back together, Jack wakes up, he's like, oh, spaghetti wolf! And Henry's like, why did I bother coming to you? The dead are hunting us down, and you do nothing. And Jack's like, nothing? You call this nothing? And Henry's like, you're drunk, and you're sleeping. And then Jack's like, my point exactly. I'm doing two things at once. You can't save the unsavable, mate. And then we have this great moment. I love this moment. Henry, he pulls out a sword and points it at Jack, which I think is a great parallel to what his father did back in Curse of the Black Pearl, when Will pulled a sword on Jack in the blacksmith shop, and then the fight ensued. So I think it's a great parallel for Henry to pull a sword on Jack as well. Great, father-like-son moment. But Henry says, like it or not, Jack, you're going to help me. I will break my father's curse. And then we hear a gun cock, and we see Jack already has his pistol pulled out and cocked and pointed at Henry. And then Jack just says, the next time you raise a sword, boy, be the last to die. So I think it's a great little Jack Sparrow moment, showing that Jack, he still is kind of that same guy, just under all of this, I don't know the right word to describe it. Of course, we talked about Jack's character and how there is a good arc for his character in this movie, but it's kind of overshadowed, and it's not as easy to identify as I would have liked it to be. It's still there, and if you're watching very intently, you will understand the arc that his character goes through, but he is kind of reduced more to a comedic sidekick almost in this film, but he does have those great as I call them, Jack Sparrow moments where, especially when Jack gets super serious or like he does something that, it's just like a certified Jack Sparrow moment. So I think it's a great move for Jack to do this. It's very, very cool. But it's just a great moment between Henry and Jack, and also a great parallel back to Curse of the Black Pearl. But Henry puts the sword away, and he goes over to the helm, and he looks over at Carina, who is still sitting over at the bow of the ship, and Jack gets interested in what's going on. He walks over to Henry, and he says, "Might I suggest you entice her with a bit of flattery?" And Henry just says, "I'm here for my father, nothing more." And then Jack just starts laughing. He's like, "Ha, I knew it. Absolutely smitten with her." And this Jack moment is great. He's like, "Now, a bit of caution when coursing a brunette. Never pursue her sister. But if you cannot avoid the charm of a sister, kill the brother. Savvy?" And I love how Henry, he looks over at Jack. He's like, "No, I don't savvy." And then Jack's just like, "Who hurt you?" And he's like, "By the way, that little sliver of knowledge will cost you 5 pieces. And I love how Henry's like, "I'm not paying you for that." And Jack just looks at me like, "Never say that to a woman." Then we have a good moment actually between Henry and Carina this time, as Henry walks over to Carina and looks out into the distance as she walks over to him. And Carina says, "Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not there." And then Henry's like the map. And Carina says, "I have to find it. It's the only link to who I am, who my father was." And then Henry says, "So we've both spent our lives searching for our fathers. Perhaps you and I are closer than you think." And then after that scene, we go over to the Silent Mary. It's currently almost sunrise. The sun's beginning to come up. And of course, Barbossa has Jack's compass that he got from Shanza. How Shanza got the compass, I just like to call it plot convenience. But he's currently using the compass, of course, to find Jack. And of course, we know from the earlier scene, the Silent Mary is hot on the Dying Gull's trail. So Barbossa sees the sun is beginning to rise, and Salazar, he says, "The sun is up, and so is your time." And one of his men pull the sword, holds it to Barbossa's throat, and Barbossa says, "Not to disagree, but the precision of our accord ends at sunrise. This be but first light, far from a fully rising sun, and I know you'd be a man of honor." And then Salazar was like, "Honor? You know nothing of me." And Barbossa just says, "I know what it's like to be bested by Jack Sparrow. He's an enemy to us both." And Salazar is like, You don't know who I am." And Barbossa says, "I've heard stories of a mighty Spanish captain, El Matador del Mar, a man who scourged the sea, hunted and killed thousands of men." And Salazar corrects him. He's like, No, men, no. Pirates, eh? Pirates. And now we get honestly one of my favorite scenes. As much as this scene complicates the larger Pirates of the Caribbean timeline, this is one of my favorite scenes in this movie. Because, first of all, it's one of the only flashback scenes that we've ever gotten in a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. If you think about it, the only other flashback scenes that we've gotten, or at least the only flashback scene, at least the only one I can think of, hopefully I'm not forgetting any, the only other flashback scene we've gotten was the very first scene at the beginning of Curse of the Black Pearl, when Elizabeth and her father and Norrington, they're all crossing from England over to Jamaica, to Port Royal. That's the only flashback scene we've gotten. So of course we got to see a young Elizabeth and Will. We never got to see a young Jack Sparrow in the movie timeline. Of course, we have a whole entire book series about Jack Sparrow as a kid, but we never got to see him as a kid in the movies. So it's a cool scene to see. Although this scene does complicate things with the young Jack Sparrow book series, and of course the actual Pirates timeline with the whole compass and everything like that. But we'll get to that in a second. But anyway, I enjoy this scene because it's a very cool flashback and a very cool scene to show Salazar's history. So we go back and we see the Silent Mary in its heyday, just destroying all of these pirate ships. It's like it's destroying like 5 ships in one, like at once. It's fantastic. So it really shows the power of the Silent Mary, how tough it was to fight the Silent Mary. Like, there was no chance of even winning against it. You couldn't outgun the Silent Mary. The Silent Mary it's kind of close maybe to the Endeavor, Beckett's flagship from Outworld's End, because it has so many cannons, it has so many crewmen. It's such a big ship that of course it can't sail fast. But if you're trying to fire onto the Silent Mary, it's just gonna overpower you with its guns. So there's really no way for a single ship to best the Silent Mary. So of course, the whole thing in this scene is that all these pirate ships gathered up to hopefully destroy the Silent Mary. Unfortunately, it doesn't work out well for them, and the Silent Mary destroys all of these ships and pretty much comes out completely unscathed. But we go onto the deck of the Silent Mary and we get to see Javier Bardem without any makeup or prosthetics or anything like that on. And we get to see human Salazar along with human Lieutenant Lazaro and, human versions of the rest of the Silent Mary crew. So we get to see them before they were cursed. So I think it's very, very cool. But Salazar begins and he says, "Pirates had infected the seas for generations." And of course, this is all like a monologue that Salazar is giving to Barbossa in real time, but we're just flashing back in the visuals of the movie. But he says, "Taking the life of my father and his father before him. So I vowed to end this plague once and for all. And that's what I did. I destroyed dozens of ships." And we get just some fantastic shots of the Silent Mary just destroying all these pirate ships. So of course we can see it has guns on, both the port and starboard side. But it looks like from this, just from how it's shooting, it has guns at the bow as well. Kind of like the Flying Dutchman had, the triple guns on the bow. So it's cool just to have that stuff. And I'm guessing they also have cannons on the stern as well, because of course, we have a great shot coming up of the Silent Mary just firing on like all these ships around it. But also, I have the Silent Mary Lego set that came out in 2017, which is a fantastic set, by the way. I have every single Lego Pirates of the Caribbean set, of course, because why would you expect anything less from me? But of course, I did get that for my birthday in 2017. But when I was building that, I noticed that they had cannons on the stern of the ship when I was building it. So I'm guessing the Silent Mary does indeed have stern cannons. So it pretty much has cannons on every single side of the ship, making it a force to be reckoned with, which I think is very cool. I think if we're looking at the ships in Pirates of the Caribbean, like the most powerful ships, of course the Black Pearl is the fastest ship in the Caribbean. But the Silent Mary, I think, is probably the most powerful ship in Pirates of the Caribbean because of its size and because of the amount of firepower it brings. It's almost indestructible because of how easily it can defend itself. Of course, it's not going to go anywhere fast because it's essentially a man of war, but it can just destroy anything in its way almost, which I think is really cool to see such a powerful, powerful ship. But Salazar continues, he's like, "The last ones joined together to try and defeat me, but they soon realized it was hopeless." Then we get that great shot I was talking about earlier, where there's currently 5 ships surrounding the Silent Mary. There's one on the port side, one on the starboard side, one in the front, and there's 2 in the back. And you can just see the Silent Mary's firing from pretty much every direction. And we can see smoke coming from the stern as well, so showcasing those stern cannons I was talking about. It's kind of hard to notice that they're there, but they are there. It does have stern cannons, which I think is such a cool addition and just makes it so much more powerful because you have cannons on every side of the ship. We got some great shots of the pirate ships getting just completely destroyed, masts being taken down, pirates falling into the water, explosions, fire, just great. But Salazar says nothing could stop the Silent Mary. And we get some great shots of Salazar back in the day giving, commands. And he's like, hit them below the waterline, vamos, vamos. We just see the amount of cannons, like the amount of firepower it can just shoot off at once, can just easily destroy a ship. It's crazy. But then we go over to one of these pirate ships, and we can see from the silhouette alone, before we even see the back of the ship, what the name is or anything, we can easily tell when it goes over to the captain, who is of course at the helm. What do we see on the backboard of the ship? We see the iconic 3 lanterns and the iconic structure on the back of the ship. We know with the sculptures as well. So we easily know this is the Black Pearl before it became the Black Pearl. So of course, since we've deduced that, this is indeed the Wicked Wench. So of course, if you don't know what the Wicked Wench is, let me briefly talk about the Wicked Wench. The name Wicked Wench, I'm guessing, was taken firstly because if you've ever been on the Pirates of the Caribbean theme park ride, the ship in the ride, the big red galleon ship in the ride that's that's firing onto the fort, that ship is actually named the Wicked Wench, which I'm guessing is where the name came from originally. So when they were naming the Black Pearl before it was the Black Pearl, I'm guessing they took inspiration from there. So, of course, the Wicked Wench was Jack's ship back in the day, and I've explained this before on episodes where I was talking about Jack and Beckett's history. We'll talk more about this in depth when we cover the book The Price of Freedom, but that's a very good book if you want to know about the history of, one, the Black Pearl, and, of course, Jack and Beckett. Great book to read. Really, really great book. We'll be talking about that later on the podcast. But, of course, as I said in those episodes, Beckett burns the Wicked Wench, and Jack, of course, makes a deal with Davy Jones. Davy Jones brings it up for 13 years. Jack is captain. Since the ship was burnt, it was now charred black. Thus, it was renamed Black Pearl. So that's a very brief history if you don't know anything about the Black Pearl. But we get a shot of the Wicked Wench's captain, and he yells out, "Hang on, boys!" And then a cannonball hits him, and he flies off the helm, and he's on his deathbed at this point. But we get to see in his hand Jack Sparrow's, or what would become Jack Sparrow's compass. So we've now reached the point of the movie where I should talk about the compass, which I talked about a little bit last episode when Jack gave it away, but I'll briefly talk about it here because I've talked about it already, and I know everyone always talks about this. Like, we don't need more about this compass error. Anyway, obviously, if you have watched Dead Man's Chest, in that movie, Tia Dalma says to Jack, the compass you bartered from me, it cannot lead you to this. So we, of course, in that movie, we got the explanation that Tia Dalma gave Jack the compass. And to reinforce this, there is also a Pirates of the Caribbean comic that we have not covered yet, that actually shows how Jack got the compass from Tia Dalma. There's actually a compass where Jack leads this guy into the jungle, and then they meet Tia Dalma, and she gives him the compass. So I'll talk about that later on as well. But that reinforces the fact that Tia Dalma gave it to Jack. Unfortunately, the people who were writing, or I don't know who was really responsible for this, but the people in charge of this movie overlooked that line in Dead Man's Chest, and they instead of going with canon, they instead did this and gave Jack's previous captain the compass, and he gives it to Jack, which it just doesn't make sense. But of course, I think that's all I'll say on it. At this point, this has been probably the biggest topic of discussion in this movie for 6 years now. So I think that's all I'll say on it. Yes, the compass, it's an error. It's a thing. Believe what you want. If you want to believe that he got it from Tia Dalma, cool, you can believe that. If you want to believe he got it from the captain, you can believe that too. I personally think it's cooler, and also, since we have 2 sources backing up that he got it from Tia Dalma versus the one source here, I think it's better to, of course, assume that he got it from Tia Dama. Anyway, moving on, Salazar says, the sea was finally pure. Their wretched flags would no longer stain the sea. And then we have this great shot of all these pirates that are just in the water. They're waving white flags and everything. And we go up to the deck of the Silent Mary. And Lieutenant Lazaro says to Salazar, he's like, they are begging for mercy. And Salazar says, mercy? Mercy? There's no mercy. And he takes a bite of an apple, which could potentially be a little Easter egg alluded to Barbossa there, but he gives the orders for Lazaro and his men to fire upon all of the survivors down in the water. So Lazaro yells out, make ready! And of course, we see all the pirates yelling for help in the water. And then we just have this cool moment where Salazar just says, adios! And he taps his sword, and Lazaro yells fire. All the pirates in the water getting shot by Salazar's crew. And then we see a young pirate boy walking up to the Wicked Wench's captain, and he says, it's up to you now, Jack. This compass points toward what you want most. Never betray it. And thus the captain dies, and we get the reveal of young Captain Jack Sparrow. So this is an interesting thing because I'm pretty sure it's a young actor who looks like Johnny Depp playing young Jack Sparrow, but they dubbed over his voice with Johnny Depp's voice, which is weird because it sounds like this young Jack Sparrow hit puberty and got a very, very deep voice. So the actor who played young Jack Sparrow is Anthony De La Torre. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. But he played young Jack Sparrow. So I feel like they should have just let him have his voice instead of having it dubbed over with Johnny Depp. But anyway, this is our first time seeing a young Jack Sparrow. And I think this actor, he looks so much like Johnny Depp, especially when Johnny Depp was younger, like in the 90s. It's really, really cool. But he opens up the compass, and the compass points to the Devil's Triangle, as Jack says. But Salazar, he says, the last of their ships were burning before my eyes. And his crew is cheering, of course, and Salazar says, and in that moment of victory, it's when I heard it. And then we back to the flashback, and young Jack Sparrow yells out, hey, hold on, Capitaine! And it gets Salazar's attention, and he says, one ship was trying to escape through the smoke. And Jack says, it's a lovely day for a sail, innit? And we can see he's up there in the crow's nest on the Wicked Wench. And Salazar says, and there in the crow's nest was this young pirate boy. And he grabs a spyglass and looks over. And Jack says, the way I see it, it's just the two of us left. You surrender to me now, and I'll let you live. Simple. And Salazar says, he stood there looking like a little bird, eh? And from that day, he earned himself a name that would haunt me for the rest of my days. Jack the Sparrow. So I'm guessing this is also giving the intention that Salazar was the one who named him Jack Sparrow. So what was his name? Just Jack Teague before this? So I don't know if that interjects with anything else that's happened in the timeline. I would have to double check, but that could line up. But I believe Jack in this movie, or in this flashback, I think he's older than he is in the Jack Sparrow book series, the Young Jack Sparrow book series. And in that book series, I'm pretty sure he refers to himself as Jack Sparrow. So it's another thing that, But Jack Sparrow continues, and he says, "Right then, you surrender me now, and I'll let you live. I shall let you live." And he jumps down and hoists up the Jolly Roger. And Salazar says, this boy was mocking my power, so I chased him, knowing that I would run my knife along his neck, and when he was dead, I would finish finally with Pirate's life." And then we go back to the flashback, and we have this great scene. It's on, I guess, technically it's the first documented film of certified Jack Sparrow moment. But, of course, the Wicked Wench, as we see from the back of the ship here, is heading straight toward the Devil's Triangle, and Salazar gives the order for the Silent Mary to follow him in. So Jack yells out, says, "To the gallows, grab some lines. Prepare the bootleg, port side." And we see the crew getting the bootleg ready, and he says, "Throw it now." And they throw the rope over the port side, and it latches onto some rocks. And then we get a great scene of the Wicked Wench pulling a bootleg turn, which is so cool, because you can't get a ship, especially one of the size of the Black Pearl, the Wicked Wench, to turn so quickly. So you have to do something like this to do a 90-degree, or in this case, the Wicked Wench does pretty much like a 180-degree turn. And it's so cool. The music in this scene is fantastic. Where we just have classic like Jack Sparrow Pirates of the Caribbean music playing as this goes on, kind of signifying that this is like Jack's like big first kind of maneuver. And he pivots the Wicked Wench around this rock, and Salazar, he yells out bootleg turn, and he tries to steer the Silent Mary away. Of course, at this point, Silent Mary is too close to the triangle to turn away, especially with a ship of that size. So as he grabs onto the helm, he looks back over to the Wicked Wench, and we just get this great shot of Jack Sparrow twirling the compass in his hands, as he got the last laugh on Captain Salazar. And Salazar, his ship, Silent Mary, goes into the Devil's Triangle, and immediately all the rocks on the seafloor rip into the hull of the Silent Mary, and the whole ship begins to explode. I'm guessing something hit the powder magazine, and everything begins to blow up. And this is where we get the kind of the reveal of why Salazar's crew look the way they do when they're cursed. Because we see when the explosions happen, whatever the explosions exploded is what kind of disappears from the cursed crew. So we see a shot of one of the guys losing their head. So it's very cool, and that's kind of how they all look so interesting and different. It's because of how they all died here. But I love this scene too, kind of showing Salazar's demise, as the explosions just destroy the Silent Mary. The masts come down, and Salazar, he tries to jump overboard, but the mast knocks him off into the water and sends him into the sea below, as the Silent Mary sinks and burns in the Devil's Triangle. And as that's all happening, Jack and the crew of the Wicked Wench are watching from afar. And we see one of the crew members of the Wicked Wench, they walk up to Jack, and he offers out a sword and a belt in his hands. And Jack just says, "What's all this?" And the crewmate says, "Tribute, sir." And before we continue, I should say that in this shot of Jack Sparrow, we see a pirate off to his right side. And what you may not know, or what you may not have realized if you aren't as intent of or passionate a fan, this is actually a young Captain Edward Teague. I mean, that's literally Captain Teague, which is very cool. It's not Keith Richards playing him, of course, because this is years back. But it's cool that Teague is here. I don't know why he's on this ship, especially because of how not great a father Teague was to Jack in the Young Jack Sparrow book series. But anyway, point aside, Edward Teague is on this ship next to Jack, and I think it's a very cool moment just to have him there. Even though it doesn't really make too much sense as to why he's there, he's there. So I think it's cool. But of course, the crew begins to offer tribute to Jack Sparrow, and this is kind of where he gets pretty much everything on his person. So we see the belt, we see they give him the red and white wrap that he has around his waist. They give him the reindeer bone. They give him all the different charms that he has in his hair. And then we see one of the guys gives him the iconic tricorn hat. So apparently this one singular moment was the defining moment in Jack Sparrow's life, which is weird because that's not really how it went down. But anyway, it's cool that this movie, tries to show this as the origin story of Jack Sparrow, but like, there's so much expanded lore outside of the movies as to what Jack did as a kid and what he did in his life before the movies. And this one scene alone just like ruins everything. As cool of a scene as it is, it just tramps over everything, which is kind of annoying. But I do enjoy the scene regardless of all the plot errors and things that happen in it. But we get one last shot of Salazar in the water as we see the Silent Mary sinking behind him. And he says, "He took everything from me and filled me with rage and pain." And then he walks over to Barbossa again, and he says, "And here is where the tale ends." And he holds his sword up behind Barbossa, but Barbossa says, "Not yet, Capitan, there!" And he points out into the distance, and he says, "Found as promised." And we see out in front of the Silent Mary, as the sun rises, we see the Dying Gull. So the next scene, we go back over to the Dying Gull, of course, later that day. And we see Carina is doing some calculations in the diary. As she's doing this, Henry, he fondles with Will's necklace that he has on. Quiet moment here on the Dying Gull. And then I love how Gibbs interrupts, and he's like, "So she's saying she's got the map, but she's the only one who can follow it." And then I love how Ballard's like, "So we shoot her?" And Henry's like, "Leave her be. She will take us to the Trident." And Gibbs is like, "You've been saying that for hours." And Scrum's like, "Two things we know are true, eh? Stars don't shine by day. And she forgot the donkey." And then Gibbs is like, "How can we go to a spot where no land exists on any map?" And Carina gets fed up, and she turns around, and she holds out the chronometer that she picked up back in St. Martin. She says, "This chronometer keeps the exact time in London. I'm using it to make an altitude measurement to determine longitude. Only then we find our exact spot at sea." And Kremble's like, "So you expect to find the Trident with a timepiece?" And she's like, "Yes. My calculations are precise and true. I'm not only an astronomer, I'm also a horologist." And everyone's like, "Oh!" And there's this great moment, and Carina looks at all. Jack's just like, "No shame in that, dear. I mean, we all have to earn a living, eh?" And he smiles at her, and she's like, "No, I'm a horologist." And Scrum's like, "So was my mum, but she didn't crow about as loud as you." And then Carina's like, "Are you saying your mother was academically inclined?" And Jack just says, "More like horizontally reclined." More like horizontally reclined. This joke gets me every single time I watch this movie. And Carina's like, "Horology is the study of time." And Scrum was like, "And she was always looking at her watch." And I love how Marty just says, "I could vouch for that." And everyone just turns around and looks at him. It's so good. And then Jack's like, so no one can find the X but you, right? And then while Jack's talking, Gibbs just interrupts. He's like, ship to the aft! And Jack's like, oof. And they all look back, and they see the Silent Mary behind the Dying Gull, getting ever closer. And Henry's like, Salazar. And Henry says, Jack, the dead will not rest until they get their revenge. And Gibbs is like, dead? He's like, no. The dead were never part of this deal. And then Pike says, we should have never followed a luckless pirate and a witch to sea. And then Ballard pulls out his pistol. He's like, right then, kill them all. And then everyone pulls out their weapons. And Jack's like, kill me and I'll be dead. And then the other dead won't be able to get their revenge. And he walks over toward Henry and Carina. He's like, against me being dead. And everyone's like all confused by this. And Henry's like, which will anger them even more. He's right. And Jack's like, that's right. And then Carina's just like, are all pirates this stupid? And Jack's like, yes. And then I love how Gibbs, even though he's on the other side of the mutiny, he goes over to Jack and he whispers, what are we going to do? And then Jack's just like, as captain, might I suggest... And then we have a great jump cut to the three of them in a longboat as the Dying Gull sails away, and Carina says, mutiny. You had to suggest a mutiny. And then Henry's like, Carina, the dead are coming. And Carina's like, well, I choose not to believe in supernatural nonsense. And Henry's like, do you not see what's behind us? Carina turns around, and we go over to the Silent Mary, where Salazar is looking through a spyglass at the three of them in the rowboat in front of them. Lieutenant Lazaro says, drop them. And a bunch of Salazar's crew, they go below decks, and they pull out these rotting sharks' corpses. And then we go back over to the rowboat, and Carina begins to pull off her dress. And Henry's like, what are you doing? And Carina's like, the men on that ship are looking for Jack, and Jack is on this boat, so I'm going to swim for it. And Jack's like, how dare you do exactly what I would do if I were you? And Henry's like, Carina, stop that. And Jack's like, no, don't stop it. And Henry's like, this has gone far enough. And Jack's like, no, it has not. And he's like, listen not to him. Carry on. And she pulls her dress off, and she dives off of the boat, leaving Henry and Jack alone. And Jack's like, why? She was almost finished. And Henry's like, I saw her ankles. And Jack's like, you'd have seen a lot more if you kept your cake hole shut. And we go back over to the Silent Mary, where Salazar's crew are throwing these dead shark corpses into the water. 3 sharks, 2 sharks, and a hammerhead. And Salazar gives a command to kill the Sparrow, and somehow these sharks wake up and they begin to follow in hot pursuit the rowboat in front of them. And then we go back on top of the Silent Mary, we see Murtagh and Mulroy, and they're like, oh, that's not good, is it? And then we go back over to Jack and Henry, and Jack's like, keep rowing, man, faster. And then Henry's like, no, that's it. I'm going with her. And he goes to jump off the ship, and Jack stands up. He's like, you would leave me for some horologist in her knickers? And Henry's like, yes. And Jack he gasps. He's like, oh, you men are all alike. And right before Henry jumps, one of the sharks leaps out of the water, and Jack saves Henry from becoming shark food. They both fall back into the boat as the sharks begin to devour it. And Jack's like, shark. And all 3 of the sharks begin to circle the rowboat. And Henry tries to smack them with one of the oars. And the oar gets stuck in the hammerhead's, exposed skin. And Henry tries to pull it out. He pulls it out, but Henry falls overboard with the force. And Jack yells out, Henry! And he goes and he helps Henry back onto the boat. Because, of course, he wouldn't be a very good semi-uncle if he let Will and Elizabeth's kid die. So he pulls Henry up, and as soon as they get back in the boat, one of the sharks leaps up. And we have this great slow-mo shot of the shark pretty much flying over the boat, right over Jack and Henry as they look at the shark over them. Really cool, like slow-mo shot, and the shark falls back into the water. And then we see Carina has reached the shore of this island. And then we go back to Jack and Henry, and the boat is sinking at this point. And I love how Henry's like, the buckets don't seem to be working. And Jack's like, we'll be fine, we'll be fine. And then we go back over to the Silent Mary, where most of the Silent Mary's crew are getting ready, and Salazar yells out, "Vamos!" And he and a bunch of his crew, they jump off of the Silent Mary, and we get the reveal that Salazar and his crew can actually run on water, which is a new thing that we haven't experienced with any of the villains yet. But I love how Jack looks over at them. He's like, how do they do that? And then Henry's like, we have to swim for it. I'll distract them. And he grabs Carina's dress and throws it into the water, which distracts the shark. And the sharks all then tear the dress to shreds. And Henry says, now. And Henry jumps out of the boat and begins to swim to shore. And I love how Jack tries to jump out, but his foot breaks through the bottom of the boat, and he's now stuck. And he looks back, sees Salazar and his men are getting closer, and he grabs a grappling hook out of the rowboat, and he throws it onto the shark that's on the back of the boat. He throws it into that shark's rib cage almost, or actually no, he throws it into the mouth. The shark falls off the boat, and as Salazar and his crew are approaching, we get what I will call a certified Jack Sparrow moment. So this is a very cool moment. I love this scene here. It's a fantastic moment for Jack, because it really shows, especially at this point in the movie, that he is still the same guy. Even though he's down on his luck, he's drunk, he still is the same Jack Sparrow inside. I think this scene kind of proves that. But as the shark begins to swim away with the grappling hook, he wraps the rope around the bow of the rowboat, and he tugs on it, and right before Salazar can kill him, the boat begins being pulled away by the shark. And then we get this awesome scene with the new Jack Sparrow music theme playing in the back as well. I think I did mention the new Jack Sparrow music theme in this movie, but it is very cool. I do really like the new Jack Sparrow theme they made for this film. Is it as iconic as the original Jack Sparrow theme? No, but it's one that's very cool for it kind of signifies like the rebirth, essentially, of the Jack Sparrow character, and how he's kind of coming back to his senses and becoming more of the pirate that we knew and loved. We get this awesome scene of him just wrangling this shark as it pulls the boat. He's laughing. Like, this is like it's an iconic Jack Sparrow moment. And he pulls on the rope, and it pulls the shark away from almost killing Henry. And Jack grabs Henry and pulls him back into the boat. And Jack steers the boat toward the shore, and of course they both fly out of the boat as the shark turns. And they both thankfully have reached the shore, however, along with Carina, who is still there. And Salazar and his crew are closing in, and they reach the shore. And this is where Carina gets to see Salazar's crew for the first time, and now, of course, she is now a believer in ghosts. But Jack sits up, and he sees Salazar standing right in front of him. And he says, "Hi, Jack Sparrow. Jack Sparrow." And I love how Jack's like, "You're Spanish?" And then this is also when we get the reveal that Salazar's crew can't step on land. So the tide comes in, and the water kind of washes away, and we see one of the guys doesn't go back with the water, and he just disintegrates and just dies. So we can tell they can't step on land. But Jack's like, "Oh, they're unable to step on land. I knew that, though." But Carina begins freaking out. She yells out, "Ghosts!" and she runs away into the jungle. And I love how Henry just yells out, "Carina!" and he runs after her. And Salazar says, And Salazar says, "You will soon pay for what you did to me." And Jack's like, no, there's no need to bother, really. I have no time to chat because me map's just run away. And Jack begins to chase after Henry and Carina, and Salazar's like, "I will be waiting for you." And Jack's like, "Why would you be waiting for me? Why would you be waiting for me?" And as Carina runs into the jungle, she accidentally steps on a trap on the ground, and she gets caught in a net that sweeps her up into the sky. And then we go over to a scene with the Dying Gull and the British Navy. So, of course, Scarfield has set sail with his crew at this point. And one of his officers yells out, "Pirates!" And Scarfield observes the Dying Gull, of course, in front of them. And we see on the Dying Gull, the pirates have made Gibbs captain, and they gave him a pirate hat, which I think is kind of funny. But Gibbs, he looks through the spyglass and sees the gigantic British ship coming toward them. And this is a fantastic Gibbs moment. But Gibbs, he walks over to Scrum, and he's like, "Scrum." And Scrum's like, "Captain?" And Gibbs is like, "Jack always told me that if anything should ever happen to him, he wanted you to be captain." And then Scrum's like, "Yeah, but the men voted for you. That's why you got the captain's hat." And Gibbs is like, "Be that as it may, them were his wishes. So be a good lad and take the wheel. And you take the captain's hat." And he puts the captain's hat on Scrum. And Scrum he smiles and laughs. He's like, "Oh, this is the proudest moment of my..." And then we got this jump cut of him getting smashed in the face by this one this one British soldier as they have been taken aboard the ship and imprisoned. And Scarfield just says, "We will beat your captain to death," until he reveals where they're headed. It's a great Gibbs moment. I think it's so funny. But Henry and Jack are looking for Carina at this point. And Jack's like, "I know what's ailing you, boy. You've got the unscratchable itch." And then Henry's like, "Carina's the only one who can help us find the trident. And I'm not in love with her." And then Jack's like, "Love? Who said anything about love? What are you talking about?" And then Henry's like, "The unscratchable itch." And then Jack's like, "Scabies. I'm talking about scabies. Small mites that burrow under the skin. Certainly ailing me has been for years. Oh, no." And then we come up to this sign that says Hangman's Bay. Strangers not welcome. And we have two gibbet cages with dead pirates in them. So we now know we are on the island of Hangman's Bay, or at least as part of the island's Hangman's Bay. I'm just going to call the whole island Hangman's Bay. But as they near the sign, they hear Carina off in the distance yelling for help. And they go over to her, and she sees them. She's like, "Henry, help me." And I love how Jack's like, "Help her." And then out of nowhere, both of them get caught in a net. And now they have all been captured. Then we go back over to the Silent Mary, where Barbossa and what remains of his crew are all strung up, hanging upside down. And he's like, "By rule of the sea, I sentence you all to death." And he starts killing Barbossa's crew. We have this great moment with Murtagh and Mulroy. And Mulroy's like, "I think we should each tell each other where our treasures are buried, just in case one of us survives." And Murtagh's like, "Oh, good idea." And Mulroy's like, "You go first." And Murtagh's like, "My treasure is buried between two crossed palm trees in an unmarked grave in Aruba. What about yours?" And then Mulroy's like, "I haven't gotten any." And Salazar yells out, he's like, "You promised me Jack's blood." And Barbossa's like, "But Jack be trapped. He can never escape that island." And Salazar yells out, "He's on land!" And then we go back over to Hangman's Bay, and we see a bunch of pirates have found Henry, Jack, and Carina, who are all trapped. And I love how Jack just says, "Hello." And the pirates just knock them all unconscious. And we go back over to the Silent Mary, and Barbossa says, "I upheld our deal, Me men and myself will go ashore. The scurvy traitor will be yours. On me honor. And Salazar's like, honor? What honor, hombre? What honor? You don't know what honor is. And Barbossa says, spare me my life, and I'll fetch you the Sparrow. And Barbossa says, an accord? And Salazar, he contemplates this for a second, and then he cuts the ropes holding Barbossa up, and Barbossa falls to the deck. And then we go over to the next scene on Hangman's Bay. And this is a very funny scene. So we can see a very cool shot of Hangman's Bay. So we see kind of the town off in the distance, and we also see some ships that are docked in the harbor. So it's cool to kind of see the island itself and kind of how it functions, even though we don't actually see that in the movie. We only see just this one scene in this big whale skeleton, which is serving as a chapel because the one lucky man is about to be married. And Jack, he wakes up after being knocked unconscious. He wakes up, and this one man is like, wake up, Sparrow. And he looks out and sees all these people sitting there in these fashioned pews in this whale skeleton. He sees Henry and Carina tied up, and we see the reveal of Pig Kelly. And he says, wake up, Sparrow. It's time to pay your debt. And Pig Kelly, of course, is a new character in this movie, but we also get the intention that Jack knew him previously back in the day. But, of course, Pig Kelly doesn't show up anywhere else but this movie. There's a reason why he doesn't show up, which we'll find out in a few minutes. But Jack's like, Pig Kelly, me old mate. And then Pig's like, mate, you hear that, boys? This lion pirate owes me a plunder of silver, and luck has brought him to Hangman's Bay, where he can settle his debt here and now. I love how Jack's like, oh, and I will, Pig. Name your price. And Pig's like, her name is Beatrice. And then we get to reveal this really, really ugly lady. And Pig's like, and she's my poor widowed sister. And then Jack's like, and he starts yelling out. And he's like, what is that? And then Pig's like, she's been looking for a respectable man, but she'll have to do. And then she's like, all right, let's get on with it. And then Jack's like, no, why? Why would we do that? And Pig's like, make an honest woman of her, Jack. Congratulations. It's your wedding day. And then Jack's like, no. And then the priest is like, let us begin. And then she's like, we'll honeymoon in the barn. And then Jack's like, And he tries to walk away, but the noose around his neck gets tighter. But then we have this one guy just playing the wedding march on a fiddle. And Jack's like, no. And he's like, now, Pig, how can I honestly make an honest woman out of it? Her. And then two kids walk out behind Beatrice, and Jack's like, what are those things? And then she's like, our children. Best not look them in the eye. And then Pig Kelly is like, bring the best man and the bridesmaid. And they bring up Henry and Carina. And then Jack, he laughs as he looks at the kids. He's like, I looked it in the eye. And the priest is like, place your hand on the Bible. And then Jack's like, I've got scabies. And she's like, so do I. And Jack's like, ugh. And the priest is like, place your hand on the Bible. And then Jack, out of nowhere, is like, I'm a bedwetter. And then Pig, he pulls out a gun and cocks it at Jack. He's like, say I do, or I'll put a bullet in your skull. And then Henry's like, Jack, they're going to kill us. And Jack's like, I don't care. And Carina's like, just say I do. And Pig's like, last chance, Jack. And Henry's like, wait, surely this is not legal. And Jack smiles. He's like, This is not legal. And Carina's like, he's right. Does any man here object to these nuptials? And Jack's like, he scoffs, he's like, I do. And then the priest like says, congratulations. And Jack just, the look on Jack's face is like, he's like, you may kiss the bride. Oh my, it's hilarious. Everyone starts clapping, and Beatrice gets ready to kiss Jack. And Jack's like, And I love Johnny's acting in this scene is hilarious. He's such a good comic actor when he needs to be. It's so good. I love he just, his mouth is agape. He just closes his eyes, and he bends down to try to begin to kiss her, and he's like you like seafood, do you? And then she's like, come on. He's like, ah. And then out of nowhere, Barbossa shoots off his blunderbuss, and he says, Jack, we meet again. And then we see Barbossa's crew, of course, coming out and surrounding this wedding going on. And Jack's like, Hector, this is me bestest mate in the whole world. And then Barbossa's like, I always knew you'd settle down eventually. And then Jack's like, did you bring me a gift? And Barbossa shoots Pig Kelly and kills him. And everyone begins to run away. And Jack's like, that'll do. And Jack, he looks at Barbossa. He's like, you look marvelous. Got quite the spring in your step. Has your leg grown back? And then Mulroy, he's like, Captain, shouldn't we be getting back to Salazar? Be trading Mr. Sparrow's life in for our own? And Barbossa says, aye, that we could, but I've come for the trident of Poseidon. And Murtaugh's like, you're going to double-cross the dead. And Mulroy's like, you did promise. And Barbossa says, and with it, I'll gut the dead that stole my command of the sea. And Jack says, as much as I love this plan, no vessel can outrun that wretched hull of a ship. And Barbossa says, but there be one Jack. And he pulls out the sword of Triton for the first time in the movie. And he says, the fastest ship I know, the Pearl. And he taps the sword of Triton on the ship in a bottle, which Jack kind of has in his vest. And he says, trapped in that bottle by a Blackbeard 5 winters ago. So we get to the notion that the big battle between the Black Pearl and the Queen Anne's Revenge, where Blackbeard took the Black Pearl and Barbossa lost his leg and everything, that happened 5 years before this movie. So Barbossa, he holds up the sword of Triton, and he says, by the power of that blackguard's sovereign blade, I hereby release the Black Pearl to her former and rightful glory. And he stabs the sword of Triton into the ship in a bottle. And then the sea in the bottle begins to roil and rustle up. And then we get this great scene of Jack, Henry, Carina, Barbossa, and the rest of Barbossa's crew running out to the shore as the bottle is leaking. And Jack's like, get ready. Get ready for it. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. And then he drops the bottle on the rocks, and the Black Pearl begins to grow back to its normal size. And it's like, stand aside, stand aside. And then we get this great shot of the Black Pearl growing, and we think it's like fully grown back to its normal size. And then we see this triumphant shot of the Black Pearl, and then we see Jack Sparrow walking right up to it, and we see it's only grown just a little bit, and it's kind of like, you know, handheld size now. And Jack's like, it's shrunken. Why doesn't it unshrink? And he's like, maybe it's cold, eh? And Barbossa takes it from him, and he's like, she needs the sea. And Barbossa throws the Black Pearl into the water, and the Black Pearl sinks down. And we get the notion for a second that nothing happened. And Jack sighs. He's like, oh, she was a fine ship. And then we get the sea begins to rumble and roil. And then out of the sea, we get to see the return of the Black Pearl. It's finally back. We get the triumphant music playing here too. Like, this is such a great moment. I remember when I was watching this movie for the first time in theaters, seeing the Black Pearl, like, back in its former glory, like, the fact that it was back, I was so happy, because, like, the Black Pearl, the Black Pearl has become iconic as it's one of the most iconic pirate ships of all time at this point. And that's, of course, because of Pirates of the Caribbean, but, like, it, just seeing it back, like, on the water and no longer trapped in a bottle, like, it just fills me with so much joy just to see that. It's fantastic. And this moment's so great because, the music playing here is fantastic. And the Pearl is finally restored. And I'm guessing there's no damage at all on the Pearl, because if you look, the lantern that was shattered in the Maelstrom battle is no longer shattered. And all the railings are all nicely preserved and everything. So I'm guessing it's now back 100% durability, as I'll say. But Barbossa, he cocks his gun at Jack's head, and Jack immediately stops laughing. And Barbossa says, "There be room for only one, Captain." And then we also get the return of Jack the Monkey, who comes up on Barbossa's shoulder. Of course, Jack the Monkey is still alive because Jack the Monkey is still cursed. If you remember, Jack the Monkey took one of the Aztec coins out of the chest at the end of Curse of the Black Pearl in the end credit scene. And we saw Jack the Monkey cursed at the beginning of Dead Man's Chest. And I guess the reason that Jack the Monkey has survived this whole time is because Jack the Monkey can't die because he's cursed. So Jack the Monkey returns as well, perched back on Barbossa's shoulder. And this is like just that like iconic part of the movie that like everything feels like it's going back to where it should be. Like the Black Pearl's back, Barbossa's back, Jack the Monkey's back, like everyone's back. Like it's just like it feels like everything's just right at this point. It's just such a good feeling. It just brings back all that nostalgia like of the first three movies to me, because like it just has that feeling to me. And Jack just says, "Filthy beast." And then we get this great shot of Barbossa. He says, "Time to race the dead." And then everyone sets out on the Black Pearl once again. And with that, we will end this episode here. So, of course, I hope you have enjoyed this episode. And I hope you'll join me next time, because I believe the next episode we should be finishing Dead Men Tell No Tales. So cannot wait to finish this movie. There's some great scenes that I cannot wait to talk about. I think you all know which scene I'm specifically talking about, but I cannot wait to talk about that. Cannot wait to wrap this movie up. And then, of course, after we wrap this movie up, you may be asking the question, well, what are you going to do now that we've gotten through all 5 movies? So what we'll be doing is kind of what we did last season on the podcast, where we expanded into Pirates of the Caribbean extended material. So we'll probably end up covering the Young Jack Sparrow book series, Price of Freedom book, the Legends of the Brother in Court book series. So we have a lot of books to cover. We also have the post Dead Man's Chest and At World's End Disney Adventures comics to cover as well. We covered all the post Curse of the Black Pearl ones. We haven't covered the post Dead Man's Chest and At World's End ones yet. So that also, of course, has the debut of the iconic Swashbucklers art style, which I'm sure if you grew up in the 2000s, you were all familiar with that art style. So that's what we're venturing into after we get these movies finished. I'm potentially planning a Pirates of the Caribbean like franchise retrospective, kind of just talking about all 5 movies as a whole, and talking about threads that go between them and different parallels and stuff like that. That's something that I'm potentially planning and getting in the works. So that should also be coming later on as well. But we're almost through this last movie. Who knows? Hopefully we have Pirates of the Caribbean 6 or Pirates of the Caribbean spinoff, whatever is coming. If it ends up coming out, of course, we will be talking about it on this podcast, whether it's good or bad, because that's what we do here. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you'll join me next time. And of course, if you've listened all the way through, thank you so much. And if you've been kind enough to leave a rating or a review on the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon, wherever you listen to the podcast, thank you so much. It really does mean a lot. If you haven't rated or reviewed yet, please do. It really helps the podcast out a lot, more than you know, to get it to new listeners and to new people, and to get them to discover this podcast. So no matter what you've done, thank you so much for listening. This means so much to me that people actually listen to me rambling about my favorite movies of all time. So thank you so much. I'll see you next time for our conclusion of Dead Men Tell No Tales. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram at Podcast of the Caribbean, and over on Twitter at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia over there, so make sure you go and check those platforms out. But be sure to always keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.